if your goal is to create a path that's really smooth and it's going to be ultimately intended for output or to load quickly, you want to use the pen tool because that's going to give you the most precision when you're drawing and creating those paths. So we're going to explore the pen tool and also some keyboard shortcuts for customizing the paths on the fly. Let's take a closer look. First of all, I want to make sure that my pen tool is active. There's actually quite a few different tools available, but here's the pen tool. And the nice thing about the pen tool is that it's used in multiple products, for example, Adobe InDesign and Illustrator, Quark Express, etc. And if you start understanding the pen tool in one product, you can even use it in some of the other products as well. I go ahead and click on that pen tool, and I'm going to look at the top, and I can see there's some different settings. One of them is the auto add delete, and I like that feature. It's going to make it easier for me to add buttons or anchor points rather, or remove anchor points. There's also this option in here, it's called the rubber band command. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. That's great when you're first starting to use the pen tool because it gives you a visual about where the pen is showing. Let's go ahead and turn that one on. And now we're going to create our line, and it's a nice idea to be able to zoom in as necessary. I'm just holding a control space and my space bar to pan, and I'm just going to click, and if I just simply do a quick click, it's going to create corners for me and straight lines. The rubber band is allowing me to see that edge. Now if I need a curve, let's go ahead and use the space bar and the control space to zoom in. If I need a curve here, what I can do is instead of clicking is I can click and drag. And by click and dragging, I'm going to create a curve. And by clicking, I'm going to get a straight line. Use that space bar to pan. And anytime, this one actually looks pretty good where I can do pretty much a straight line. And come down here, straight line, and maybe a little bit of a curve and a straight line. And I can see that there's a little extra gap here, and that's okay. If I can either leave it or I can come back and fix it after the fact. So I'm just going to keep going through. Now this is interesting. How much of that tread do I really want to capture? Do I want to just make it a rough estimate, or want to go in and get all those elements? I think for the sake of this exercise, we're going to make it rough. And we're just going to make kind of a loose selection. Now I'm going to see where the arc of the curve is. Where is the curve really changing? I could actually go down about as far here if I wanted to, or I could put it up here. And again, the real art of this tool is to use as few points as possible. I'm going to come down here to the point to this curve, and I'm just going to pull it out so that it's tracing that the shape of the tire here. If I didn't quite go where I wanted to go, I could hold down my control key, and by holding down my control key, I temporarily get the arrow tool. And then I could actually reposition that point, and I can adjust the directional handles, these paths. Then I let go of the control key, and I'm back ready to keep painting. And again, I'm checking where does that curve change, and this looks like a good point right about here. Scroll up, and again, I'm kind of directing that. I'm going to hold down my control key. And again, this is something that I always do after I've created the whole entire path, or just as I'm going through, I can use my control key and jump in. Got my line. Now here, the curve is continuing, and I don't really want a curve. I want a straight line. So I'm going to hold down my Alt key, and with my Alt key, I'm able to change the direction of the curve. And you can see how it's only changing one handle, not together. I'm going to let go of my Alt key, and I can come back and position it and create another curve, create a curve, and whoops, maybe I don't want it right there. I think actually where I want to put this, I'm using my control key here to move it, using my control key to position that as I want to come back. Now, again, I'm having that same thing where I have a sharp corner, and the corner is actually changing directions, but it wants to curve. It wants to curve. It wants to continue the curve like an S, and that's the kind of the way the pen works. So what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to change that. Now let's try this with just the control key. If I use the control key, notice how both of the directional paths are changing at the same time. But if I move back to my Alt command, I can change just one path. So the Alt is what allows you to change the direction of your corners to curves, your curves to corners. You can make your symmetrical curves asymmetrical or vice versa. I'll go ahead and kind of pull down. That rubber band really does make a nice visual as you're positioning that. You can add a little bit of a curve. And if for some reason if you want to go back and clean up later, you always can. And getting pretty close there. I'm going to use my Alt key to pull that in. Click. And position it. You can use the Shift key if you want, and that helps constrain the lines to straight lines to 90-degree angles. But you don't need to use the Shift key. Looks like maybe I needed to hold down. There we go. Also, if you happen to click in the place that you don't like, for example, you're clicking down here and you realize, oh, I missed a spot, you can use the backspace or the undo command. And I just want to make sure that I'm still connecting. So as I hover my mouse, this is telling me I'm going to create a new path, but I have to hover on an existing path telling me I'm going to connect back. So I'm still going in. And we're almost to the end of this. And I'll just finish it up with a little bit of a curve here. And what's happening is it closed the path for me. Now if I hover my mouse on an empty space, I get that symbol with the star telling me I'm going to create a brand new path. But if I hover on an existing path, make sure it's selected here. I'm going to go back and hold down my control key and click on the path. So I'm hovering on an existing path that's selected. Then I can add or remove these anchor points. Now remember we had this auto add or delete. So I don't even have to switch my tool. I don't have to go back and forth between the anchor point and the delete point. I can simply hover on a selected path, and if I need to add a point, I can do that. I can also hold down that control key and get to that anchor point. And again, it's a straight corner, and if I wanted to convert it, I can use my Alt key and just pull that out, and I'm able to create this as a curve element. Pulling that out, and then let go of the Alt key, and I want to make sure I hold the control key down, otherwise I'll be deleting that anchor point. Hold down the control key. So a lot of this has to do with the keyboard shortcuts. If you don't feel comfortable with the keyboard shortcuts, you can always go ahead and change your tools. In fact, this convert point tool is the equivalent of using the Alt command. And these arrow keys, specifically the direct selection, is the equivalent of using the control. But I would highly encourage you to get familiar with these commands because for two reasons, really. One is that you're going to be using them a lot when you're drawing with the pen tool. And the other reason is that they are actually the same shortcuts that are used in other products. Here's my Alt tool. So if you end up using the pen tool in, let's say, InDesign or Illustrator, it's going to use the same options. So I'm going to go ahead and use my Alt command and curve that out. And with my Alt command again, with the directional arrow, I can change the curve to go in opposite direction. Now, do I need another point? It looks like I don't. It looks pretty good. And you just are going to go back and inspect it. Use the space bar or the hand tool to kind of scroll through and inspect your path until you get the way you like it. Now, as I'm making this path here, I may want to add to it, add different pieces. This is still a work path, but I'm noticing there's some spots in here like the circle and this area, so I may want to make some changes to that path. And noticing here that I have an option to combine shapes, subtract, intersect, or exclude shapes. So as I'm working on the path, and maybe if we could change that thumbnail here, see if we can panel options, make this a large thumbnail. It might make it easier to see what's going on. Here's that work path that we're working on. Let's go ahead and create another path inside the middle here to knock out or represent where this sky or this ground is. And I'm noticing that I have the symbol with a star, and I'm going to click And I won't worry too much about the details because it looks like we got mostly sharp corners. I think of learning how to use the pen tool a little bit like learning how to write cursive. Definitely something that we can do. We just have to clock some of those hours so that we get that hand coordination. But if you can see it down here at the bottom, there's actually a knockout in the path because of the path was being added to the effect. And I could keep going in here. And I'll just do kind of a simple one just with straight lines. And you can see how it's creating those holes based on how I've added those by default, combining those shapes. Now, let's go ahead and make that a work path. I'll call that pen 1. Click on OK here. And I'll just click somewhere else, just right below it if I can get there. Maybe sometimes it's hard to get below because of the way the thumbnails are. So let's go back to panel options and make that to a smaller thumbnail so I can get below it. I had turned on the rubber band. I'm going to turn that feature off so you can see what it looks like without the rubber band. Because a lot of times when you work with the pen tools, you don't have that luxury. And when I go ahead and create the tool and I click, I don't have anything telling me where the line's going to go. So I just have to intuit where it's going to go. And the big idea here is that you're clicking where you want the next line to be, and it's going to move into the future. So you're clicking where the anchor points are, and if you want a curve, you're clicking in the direction you want the curve to go. That's really the big idea. So and the curves are the direction you want the pen to go and the direction you want the curve, the previous curve to go to. So you're using that. But you can see how that rubber band really does help. It's giving you a nice guide as you're moving that around. And again, as you start practicing, you're going to get more precise with these information. Just take advantage of, I'm going to go ahead and double click here. It closes. Oops, let's go back up here. I'm going to go ahead and close it up. I got that circle. And I'm again take advantage of my different keyboard shortcuts, my undo command, and my backspace. And you'll be able to create these more precise paths that are going to serve you well when you're trying to load large documents or turn this into a vector shape or send it out to print. Okay, well now it's time for a pop quiz. When using the pen tool, what key would you hold to convert an anchor point with a smooth curve to a sharp corner? A, Shift, B, Control, C, Alt, D, P. The answer is C, Alt.